He has years of professional experience and has held positions at BNY Mellon and Merrill Lynch. Brandon currently holds his Series 766 on life insurance license. He is also pursuing the CFP designation. As an advisor on the team, he works closely with the clients to help them understand their financial situation and develop strategies that are in line with their risk tolerance. Brandon grew up in Cleveland and currently resides in Grove City. He is a car enthusiast and a member of the BMW Car Club of America. He also volunteers for the benefit of animal welfare via the ASPCA. All right, turn it over to Brandon.
Good afternoon. I'd like to introduce myself with a couple more words about myself. I'm a financial advisor with Antolino and Associates. We've been in business since 1960, originally started by Ralph Antolino Sr. and then Ralph Antolino Jr. had taken the reins and manages it with approximately 10 other individuals. So we're also a small business like a lot of you. Our work ranges from anyone who is an individual looking to save for retirement or make sure that they're on the right track, or just general financial questions and decision making. That ranges all the way from an individual all the way to someone who has a business looking to improve, buy, sell, or make any changes. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today, specifically cash flow management for a small business. This can be applied personally, and it is applied personally by us on a regular basis as well. So specifically, we'll talk about small business, but from a personal perspective, we talk in the same exact way to help section off different assets and what they're used for. So the ABCs of cash flow is the model and the method as to how we talk about financial assets and what they mean to you. We talk in a very high level. So we separate it into three buckets, as you might guess: A bucket versus B bucket versus C. A lot of people have several accounts for each bucket. So you don't have to only have 3 accounts alone. You have more than that in each bucket. But from our perspective, we just want to make sure that the amount in each bucket is correct. So the value of doing this is that as small business owners and individuals, we have a lot going on in our life. So the last thing we need to worry about is having the balance in our checking account or our emergency fund or our retirement plan. Is it correct? Is it in the right spot? And not going backwards. That's what this process does for individuals and small businesses. It sets a framework and it helps you make decisions with confidence. So I'd like to go to the next slide. We'll talk about the A account, or we call the available account. The value of this account is that it is accessible and ready to be used for regular expenses. So these are going to be regular expenses that you guys have for your business or even personally, right? So like a mortgage or regular payroll or normal expenses that you have on a regular basis. What it's not used for, which I think some of us may struggle with, is using it for something like a special expense or a one-off expense that you have in your mind. So this is used for shorter term, regular monthly average expenses. It's not used for retirement, and it's ideally not used for those one-off expenses. Obviously, you can transfer money into like a checking account to pay for something in the one-off, but you don't normally need to carry a giant balance in this account. So the question becomes, how much do you actually need? And the short answer is that it depends. Every business is different. Some businesses need a tremendous amount of cash in this available account to function and be secure and not go backwards. And other businesses don't really require quite as much cash. So it really depends on you and your business. So we'll talk about how we actually get to that number. There's two ways that we've found pretty valuable to find out what number that is. And the number that I'm talking about is the business's lifestyle definition. So that monthly number that you pay on a regular basis. It's hard to know because it changes. It changes personally. You go travel or you have a one-off expense, your car breaks, and you spend $1,000. Well, you're not going to assume that you're spending $1,000 on your car every month fixing it, right? So we have to assume an averages, and we have to use something that will give us a confident variable. For businesses, we either have an income statement, right? So you can find your income statement and use that. The last 3 to 6 months, find the average of that number. So you can add the last 3 months, divide by 3. There's your average. And you can do a very similar thing with your bank statements. So if you have personal accounts or you want to do this exercise on a personal level, you can do the exact same thing. If you have a checking account at Huntington or Chase, look at the expenses over the last 3 months, divide by 3, and then that's your average. So that will help you find out what number you may need on a monthly basis. One of the questions we get is regarding business owner distributions. Those are not always the same and they do not always happen at the same time. So we want to make sure that this A account, the available account, is there on average to handle that. So we do want to include business owner distributions on an average basis if possible. So now that we know how much we put in the A account, we hold in the A account on a regular basis, we want to confirm how much. So 1 to 2 months is normally what we recommend. And anything above that is usually not as efficient to have readily available. So over 2 months is usually our maximum. So for example, if we know that the business takes $15,000 a month on average to run a minimum of $15,000, we would really like to see in there for security and making sure that you don't go backwards or have to tap other accounts or something like that. So very minimum, in this case, 15,000, but in real life, we would see maybe 20 to 30,000, right? That's more than enough buffer to handle regular expenses. And then maybe there's additional expenses or one-offs that occur. So this is a gauge. So just remind yourself that once you have that $30,000 amount, whatever amount it happens to be for you, whether it's personally or through the business, that is a gauge and a level that can spill into a different bucket, which I'm going to get to. So there's 2 other buckets here, but this is the first bucket to make sure that that's dialed in at an appropriate level. So if your business takes 15 grand to run per month, you have 100 grand in cash, for example, it may not be efficient unless you're planning to spend a big chunk of money on a one-off basis. So the last point I want to make about this account is a lot of people are talking about inflation and expenses and different things that happen. And I don't want to have excessive cash because I'm losing money. Well, that is true. However, the value of this account is that you don't go backwards. The value that it's liquid and it's there. If you were to invest this money in a money market, okay, you get a couple of %, but that's not going to help grow your business. What's going to help grow your business is having the money in the business, reinvesting, and not having to do something special to access the one-time expense. So you don't want to go backwards. The value of this is that it's there. The value is not that it's compounding. We'll get into a different account called the compound account in a second. So once this value is appropriate, we will graduate to funding what we call a buffer account. A lot of people think of this as an emergency fund, and it is in a lot of ways. So this is something that we would want to use for planned and unplanned expenses. So opportunities and dangers is noted here, right? You want to reinvest in the business, technology, new hires, something like that. You plan to do those things in a short period of time. Have that money ready in the buffer account. if you know you're going to spend it, the value is that that's ready and earmarked for that purpose. A lot of people, we've had some questions on if this should be 100% cash, right? Because now we have cash on top of cash. It's not that cash is a bad thing, but too much of it is not very logical. So some individuals like to use the line of credit for a buffer account, and for some businesses, that's okay. But make sure that that line of credit is ready. Don't create it and use it in the same fashion, right? Have it already created if that's your actual plan. So part of this whole process here is having a gauge and being able to repeat a process on a regular basis. So if your plan and you tell yourself and your other coworkers or your other business owners, that you're using the line of credit as your buffer account, well, let's make sure we have a line of credit that's ready to go and how it works and understanding how that works. Okay. So 2 to 3 months in this account on top of the available account. So this is monthly lifestyle, which we've already figured out, right? So if we know that this person's business takes $15,000 a month to run, we would probably have 30,000 ideally or so in this from an expense standpoint. And then on top of that, if we plan to spend money on technology, you know, you're buying computers or something like that, you can have that money earmarked in there as well. Does that make sense so far? Okay. So it's very important to have these accounts separated. And when I say separated, it can be a single checking account, for example. Some people are okay managing one account that represents 2 buckets in this case. And it's personal preference. For me, I like to separate me personally and a lot of clients that we work with. You have a checking for your available, and you have a savings for your buffer, for example. So just know what that amount is and know where it is. So that's a gauge. Just remind yourself that it is a gauge and it is something that will help you from going backwards. So once we have funded the available account and the buffer account, we will start thinking about longer term investments, outside the business, right? So you're constantly probably reinvesting into the business to some degree. These are cash accounts and these are functioning accounts that will exist. But we also have investments that you will make. And after Hannah presented, I realized there's pictures here. So I apologize if that's not compliant approved. So I guarantee I don't think these will probably be there after I present. So anyways, learned something today. So thank you for that. So compound account. So this is the C account. And this is what people get mixed up in, is they have some cash and they want to invest some cash, whether it's personally or in the business. I want to buy some stocks, or the market's down, so I want to invest some money. Well, you don't want to go backwards and invest the money, have it go down, which has happened a lot recently, right? And then have less money and then need it, and you have to sell low and then fund the thing that you're going to do. That's the whole process of this, to avoid doing that, which will have you have less money and more frustration. And this is adaptable personally or professionally or through a business. So the compound account, this is a longer term. A lot of people see it as a retirement account, right? You have a 401k through work, or you have an IRA, or even a brokerage account. It's longer term invested, stocks and bonds, or whatever you like to invest in. Those are accounts that are not being used right now for cash for the business. So knowing that that's separate and treating it that way is very valuable. You'll make more money in the long run, right? Not messing with things that are volatile and move around much more than money that's accessible. And 2 points about this account. The first picture is a snowball. That's compounding. People talk about compound inflation, compound interest. Compound interest is interest earned, dividends, or any sort of gain on an account that's reinvested, which earns more interest. That will occur if you have a compound account set up that you don't touch and use for short-term needs. So it compounds on itself and it continues to grow. So that is very valuable to you, not taking that out. Also, the other picture, if you can see, is a military compound. It's harder to get into, and there's a purpose, and it's intentional. So those shorter term accounts are easy to get into because that's their value. Their value is that they are a barrier between you and this account. And this account functions and will earn much more money over time, usually, when you don't mess with it and you don't access it. So having it separate is very important. Okay. So talk a little bit about this. One of the points I would like to make about this account or any account in general is liability. Having these assets in the business can be a liability threat to some degree. So we want to be very careful with where they're placed and be very intentional with how they're titled and things like that. Obviously, having an appropriate business entity set up is very helpful. We work with clients every day to make those decisions. So happy to talk a little bit more about that as well. Okay. So you have your A account and your B account. They have cash. They're accessible to you and they're functioning well. And you're funding your compound account. The benefit of being a business owner, you get the fruit of being a business owner distributions. One of the values that we have found is making a decision prior to those distributions occurring. And that decision is how much to put where. If you decide 100% business owner distribution goes to you every single time, well, that may not be sustainable. So we'd like to say, for example, 80-20, 80% goes to you, 20% goes to a retirement account or just something else, right? So deciding beforehand and then testing that and using that can always change it. But the value of this whole process is that it's repeatable and scalable. I'm not telling you everyone needs $10,000 accessible, right? Because everyone's different. Sometimes you need less, sometimes you need more. This is applicable to anyone because it is scalable and not specific in that way. So keep in mind when you make distributions, be meaningful with them and intentional. Okay. So a little bit about the longer term account, the C account, the compound account. These numbers are probably hard to see in the back, but for example, we have $1 million invested, you had a business run and you've saved and invested in compound over time. How much can you spend and how long can it last? So we will get to this obviously after your A and B accounts are funded, because it's hard to fund a retirement plan when you don't have enough cash to run your business. So make sure that cash is accessible and ready. And once those naturally start spilling over, that's when we can talk about what percent you can take out of your assets. In this example, we have $1 million, spend rate of 4%, which means they get 40 grand per year, or this person has 40,000 bucks per year. Keep in mind, other inflows don't only come from the business or from retirement plans. They come from other things like Social Security or from an annuity or from any other income sources. So if you know how much you need in retirement or any part of your life, you can always back out the recurring inflows. So keep that in mind. And we do all kinds of cash flow planning for clients. So we know it's never really that simple just to have one thing flow everything. Sometimes that is the case. And other times you have other things going on like most people. So from an appropriate distribution amount, this is a little bit more on the retirement side. How much can you take? Can you spend 5% of your assets? Can you spend 10? How long will that last? Usually the range from your asset standpoint is between 3 and 6%. If it's 5 or more, it's a little bit of a danger zone because we find that you're spending some of the principal. So of course, the stock market is getting beat up right now. So in the last 10 months or so, it's down a lot. We don't want to use that as an assumption every single year because it's not been that every single year. But if we assume the stock market earns 5 to 10% on average, right, over longer periods of time, and you spend 5, usually that's enough growth and income from an investment portfolio that will last for an extended period of time. And there's a lot more that goes into it. So I am simplifying a little bit, but that's just giving you a gauge. It gives you an idea and confidence level as to what's appropriate for you and what you may want to get to as a level of your distribution. So we'll do a little bit of action steps here. The most important thing is having those accounts accessible, the A and the B, the values that they're there. The value is not that you're buying some hot stock that is quite honestly probably destroyed this year. A lot of individual positions, especially the COVID names, right? The pandemic stocks are not smart choices for these accounts, the A and the B accounts. For the C account, you can talk about what's appropriate for you and risk tolerance. But we want to make sure that we earmark separate funds for separate purposes, not having one giant bucket for everything you do. It's not really that efficient, and you'll have a lot more money in the future by doing this because it'll prevent you from going backwards. So this is what we call the ABCs of cash flow, the actual model we use. It has buckets here, and you can see there's more than 3 accounts, especially for this person, a compound account. They have potentially 3 accounts that they could use. So this is an exercise that we work with clients on, separating these accounts. And I have handouts of these, by the way. If you guys are curious, I can definitely give you one, and I have an electronic one, which is a little bit more helpful because it actually does the calculation as to what, on a high level you may need in each account. So it's much more helpful if you see it. A lot of us are visual people. So whether you love numbers or hate them, well, my ideal level is 15 grand in the A account. Am I there? Yes or no? So that eliminates a lot of the guesswork. So that's what this is all about, more than anything. And then we can be more creative for cash flows and other investment purposes and other questions and things like that. So questions, concerns, any thoughts or questions for anyone? No? Well, thank you. Appreciate it.